Welcome back, friends, to the Benison Watch channel. Thank you for subscribing, and for those of you who are just joining us, welcome, where we share information on luxury timepieces, haute horology innovations and advancements, and servicing, protecting, and caring for your luxury watches. We also share some quite interesting information around watch values and how the markets move, so you'll see a lot of different content from us on this channel. If you don't subscribe already, please do, because you'll be the first to know about these drops, including things like this where we're going to respond to questions that you guys as viewers will answer and ask. So one of the questions we recently saw that came through on Reddit but also is highly searched on Google is, do Panerai timepieces hold value? Are they notorious for holding value? So we will answer that question on today's episode. Panerai timepieces came from a long legacy of Italian-made heritage. So if you don't know the story of Panerai and you don't really familiarize yourself with Panerai, they're known as big, bulky, functional tool watches traditionally. And they made their exuberance, they made their big notarization, their big fame, I guess, through the celebrities who started wearing them about 20 years ago. But before that ever happened, the watches were actually made for the Italian Navy, and they were designed to withstand extreme environments when it came to, being out in combat, running missions, deep diving, so on and so forth. And the half moon crown of the very famous Luminor edition model, which is the one that most people know when they look at a Panerai, it's called the Luminor, has that crown guard, which is the half moon crown protector that flip locks open and close. And the timepiece itself was actually designed as a function of form after what it was used for. Back in the days, it wasn't always just about aesthetics and selling more units. It was about, does this watch actually help execute and perform the job that it's needed for the people that we want to give it to? And the Italian Navy was in need of a functional tool watch that would really hold up against any kinds of badass missions and things they were coming across, and being able to keep time even if things got real rough. So that linkage of Panerai with their design and being notorious for being a functional tool, big, bulky, out in the field watch, married up with Rolex's history of the movements that were overlapped and shared. So at one point in history, a while ago, Rolex actually used Panerai's innovation and a lot of their functionality in movements, and they had overlap with what they did in the timepiece space before they separated out. And back in this time, Panerai still wasn't really massively known. It wasn't massively adopted. In fact, it wasn't available for most people like you and me to purchase a Panerai timepiece. It was, once again, more for those who were actually out in the field. But as Panerai was being utilized for their horological sense in what the movements were, and folks were benefiting from that, whether they knew it or not, with the linkage to Rolex, Panerai started to gain more notoriety. And Angelo Bonatti, who was the previous CEO, who retired in 2008, really took the company from being an unknown in the haute horology space and the luxury watch space to being a widely known household brand name that most at least associate with high value. So knowing this history will help answer this question that people have of whether Panerai watches hold value or not. And I will give you a definitive answer. But the Panerai pieces essentially started varying their models. So what originally started as just a functional tool watch with these huge, 44 to 48 millimeter cases, started changing to adopt to an audience that was more mass market. So not everyone's in the Navy, not everyone's out there, deep diving every single day trying to avoid bullets. And more people were interested in being into exploring brands outside of Rolex. So Angelo Bonatti and Panerai started playing off of this and used the design aesthetic of the Luminor and the Radio Mirror. The Radio Mirror is the other most popular concept model base, because there's a lot of variations off of these two models, but the Panerai Luminor and the Panerai Radio Mirror are the two different major model differences. The Radio Mirror doesn't have the crown guard That's the half moon. It's usually just the crown that's standalone. It has different variations of how that crown looks, whether it's an inverted triangle or whether it's the short stack cylinder crown that you're used to with Rolex and other brands. So Panerai started diversifying their aesthetic and their design, and what became popular was an in-between size. So even though the larger sizes were being adopted by celebrities who were very large individuals, which we'll discuss, Panerai still had this kind of in-between size that was perfect, which was a 44 millimeter. And those pieces did really well in steel, and then they started making them in more precious metals like gold. And folks who wanted a nice timepiece that really wanted the bulkiness or the like boldness and or the kind of presence of a Panerai and not being shy, like those little thin JJ Lacoutes or a razor thin gold Patek Philippe on a leather strap. Like, that is not this crowd. This was for the crowd that was like the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and the Sylvester Stallones and the MMA fighters and guys who were like big dudes who wanted that wrist presence. And to this day, not only did the 44 millimeter Panerai do exceptionally well, the submersible line, which is the line that is dedicated towards deep diving and water resistance, even more so than a base luminor or radiomere, did exceptionally well in a larger size. So you'll see submersibles all the way up to size 47, 48 millimeter that do exceptionally well and have aesthetics like the Bronzo, which is a bronze case that ages over time with oxidization that looks really cool, and collectors went wild for this. So Panerai has always held value in the sense that the collectors and the people who want the pieces are continuing to have demand for the pieces that are the legacy of what made Panerai great. So to answer the question, yes and no. Panerai holds value and it doesn't hold value depending on what you are buying. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the newer Panerais, after especially 2008 when the CEO Angelo Bonatti retired, Panerai started moving to in-house movements. They weren't outsourcing a lot of their movements to Swiss movement houses, and you may have thought or think this is a great idea, and usually it's a very interesting opportunity when timepiece houses and brands and manufacturers do this. But a lot of people viewed this as a money grab. Like, it was an opportunity for the new Panerai brand to make more money because they were now in-house movements, and they started coming out with variations on timepieces that arguably did not stay true to their heritage. And this is what contributed to the Panerai timepiece brand kind of losing its value. So there used to be a group of enthusiasts, and some of you know these people, called the Paneristi. And the Paneristi was like a cult group, and it's still around today, but it's not nearly as aggressive as it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, where people would go out and buy Panerais specifically for the reference number and the model and that attribute that this Panerai had, to add to their collection, share information and enthusiasm with other collectors, and trade back and forth. It was a huge following of these like insane enthusiasts. And they started to lose their enthusiasm for the brand once the in-house movements were made and variations were created that started not making sense to what excited the Paneristi in the first place. So an example is Panerai started making like 40 millimeter, 42 millimeter steel Panerai luminors that were only rated for like 3 ATM, which is barely anything when it comes to water resistance and protection from deep diving. So Panerai started making an exorbitant amount of reference numbers and models that looked so similar to every other model that they had, that they not only convoluted and flooded their entire market so that the collector aspect of it became harder to, allow for them to basically appreciate and value. But it confused the market too, because you had like 5 variations of these reference numbers that looked almost the exact same. And it was like, so what's the difference if they're that subtle? There's so many options, there's so much supply, and now the Paneristi are unenthused because you have models that aren't really functioning or giving that heritage of what made Panerai great in the first place. And they've strayed from that pretty aggressively. So even though they might have acquired some new clients and a new audience to the brand, the argument is that those aspects of Panerai have actually made it lose value and depreciate in the market. And if you buy some of these newer models that don't really command that value hold or don't have the legacy attribution to it, you're not going to make money. You're going to lose money. Or you can buy it at the right price, arbitrage the price difference, sell it for a little profit, but it's not an investment. Now, there are still models and there are still parts of the Panerai brand that are very prominent that will hold value, to answer the question, which is why I say yes and no. There are certain models, like an original Bronzo submersible with like box and papers that have a little bit of aging that have been well kept, that can go well over MSRP. There are pieces like the Panerais that are old enough that they started overlapping some of the Rolex contribution that are extremely valuable. You know, first editions of certain Luminors are extremely valuable. Classic 44 millimeter steel, like base models of certain manufacturer runs, because they were one of the first, are valuable. And then very specific, again, reference numbers that are limited in run that the Paneristi still love. Like an example is the pole-to-pole, you know, Mike Horn, who traveled and was an explorer to the different Arctic poles, came out with an edition that's a 47 millimeter submersible that is hard to find. That's a collector edition. Now, that doesn't mean that this thing is constantly going up at 20% year over year, but it's at and or above MSRP, and it hasn't dropped because Panerai collectors still like it. They still would buy it if they saw it in the market, and so on and so forth. So there are very specific reference numbers you can buy, and certain models, certain flyback chronographs, Ratra pants, things that are really, really exciting and beautiful and unique to Panerai and its heritage that will continue to hold value. It's a great brand. You know, it again exploded once people like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger and these guys started rocking these watches. The Rock, you know, owning and wearing these watches out. You know, it brought more brand awareness. It showed that these bigger guys and people who liked bigger wrist presence, men and women, wanted these watches, and kind of boosted them up into the stratosphere of becoming a brand that was going to stay and have the longevity of holding that value. But again, as time goes on, we'll see where Panerai goes and what the story tells. But what I want you to look out for, and what should be the most important key factor when making this decision or trying to understand which Panerais to buy, is Panerai will hold value for the right models, but there are a lot of them, I'd say probably 85% of them, that are not going to hold value at all. And if you just overpay for those, it's a guarantee you're going to lose money. And, you know, enjoy the watches. They are a great brand still. It's not that they're not. I just hope that they start reverting back to their heritage and the sizes and the cases and the models that did them service and really stimulated the Paneristi enthusiasts and those who care about more functional tool watches. I do see them making some advancements in trying experimental materials like Carbotech, which is really cool, and doing nautical themed, like you know, things for the regattas, like the countdown mechanisms. So anything like that that they're developing that has the linkage to functional tool watches and the beautiful case sizes, the beautiful case materials, and being those 44s to 47s will continue to do well. Obviously, if they're mass produced, then there's an oversupply that will diminish the value in the market, but a lot of them are being held by collectors, and I still know a lot of Paneristi guys and gals who go crazy for certain models, and you know, it's been amazing to see them continue to keep that flame burning bright. So I hope this gave you some context on Panerai. We can do a lot of other videos based on these brands or any questions you guys have. So if you have any questions, you want to talk about certain topics, drop them in the comments below. We do respond, we do answer, and I have a bunch of knowledge I'm willing to share with you guys. So stay tuned, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time, all right? Peace.